example, when the anxiety starts building up, when I see it, and you see, usually it really comes into, it expresses itself that when there is a fear of losing self, fear that my mind will one day cease to exist, then it's a very strong fear, and then when I can't win it with rationality, then there's this helplessness and anxiety is, and then there's just the remembrance of that of those experiences is the only thing that
helps you in that moment.
Helps me. It really helps me let go and actually just look at the sensation of it until it goes away. In the past, I experienced anxiety of cold sweat and blackouts, and actually experienced uncontrollable cry for many years.
Interesting.
Actually, that as
it's a method, as a means to overcome that.
Yeah. So for me, like before I went to Buddhism, for me was like my goal for in life was to
get rid of
free of that
fear,
anxiety. That way, like
yes.
Buddhism. The nice thing about it is that this like was a feeling checklist, but then I found out there's much more beyond.
Good. That's an interesting point. I'm glad to hear this. So it's also practical in terms of fear then. So fear of death is a very powerful fear, but then living in the 21st century, there's a lot of fear. So also when fear arises, that's a good point. When fear arises, no matter how it manifests, what is the I that's scared? Fear is a good one. I talked about being criticized. Boaz has a very good one. The embarrassment. I really like that one. If you have a hard time identifying the I, well, do something that is really embarrassing in front of lots of people. Right? Didn't you describe talking to a stone, or was it to a plant? To a plant. That's right. Don Juan, yeah, based on Don Juan. So.
Yes, I have a question regarding this.
I should speak up. Should I repeat the question or no?
No, I want to ask.
Oh, in relation to that, yes, please.
This is actually a good example of the extreme of existence. Do you have example for the extreme of nihilism, of existence?
Oh, okay, but let me just, what Boaz just said, just to be clear again, here's an example, and I repeat Tzipi's question, but if you have a hard time to remember a time you were embarrassed, you were criticized or praised or wherever, you could also choose a situation where you're embarrassed. That's a very good time to watch the I. And that, in extreme situations, that's helpful, but then also to remember, as he said, at the time of death.
Apologies, I'm going to talk to some plants.
Yes, he's going to go and do something embarrassing. Let's follow him to help him. Okay, does that make sense? This idea. So I don't know whether it's beneficial for everyone. I don't know whether it's beneficial for everyone. But this could be something when you deal with fear. Maybe take this as a solution. Okay. Also, Tzipi, she asked something, but actually you raised your hand before.
I didn't finish actually.
Pardon?
I didn't finish.
You didn't finish? Okay.
I want to say something, but also want to ask a question. So.
Okay, one different question. So go quick.
First, I'm happy that Boaz left because no, he has he's doing a course on death.
And you didn't attend.
No, and I attend to it. So everything that I say here can be used against me later.
Okay.
In the course, like he will be facing me like I remember what you said there, and he started like investigating it.
Okay.
But what I wanted to ask, and maybe it's better if you wish to answer it after other people.
Go ahead.
Something that is related to what you said.
Okay. Yeah.
We talked about like in terms of the Buddha, I understand that Buddha is free from the samsaras, the 12 links, and right? But in terms of the 5 aggregates, I'm asking what happens in the 4th aggregate in terms of the Buddha. Because he had 5 aggregates, and that's like Shakyamuni, right? And we still have 5 aggregates. And
The purified version of the
right, yeah, so I don't know, I never heard of that. I know that also, like, in Pali terms, his default state of mind was the 2nd jhana. It means there was no thinking, like, manja, like, just like reactively, yeah. So, how does it look? So, how does it?
Well, like, as I said, the 5 aggregates are divided differently according to the mental factors that are not mentioned as part of the 5 aggregates. So the main mind, okay, I'll repeat the question. So the question is, he's never heard about the Buddha's aggregates being described as the 5 aggregates, but the purified version. So this is very strong in the Mahayana tradition. In the Mahayana tradition, and especially in the Tantric tradition, we talk of the 5 purified aggregates as being the aggregates of the Buddha, and the 5 non-purified as the aggregates of sentient beings, of the contaminated ones in the case of sentient beings, and the uncontaminated ones in the case of a Buddha. So here the 5 aggregates are, well, there's no karmic actions in the sense of like leaving imprints, but there's still actions, pure actions of body, speech and mind. So you could talk of them as samskara, as like being part of the thoughts of the Buddha, the virtuous thoughts in that sense, of just the virtue of that, if you like, those actions of body, speech and mind. So what was the second part? You asked something about what was that? About the Buddha? So the purified version, and then in the Theravada tradition something...
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that how that describe the default state of mind of the Buddha.
The default state.
Yeah, that he's like in the 2nd jhana, which has certain qualities and things.
Oh, the 2nd jhana, as in like the 4 jhanas?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the fourth jhana, all the jhanas, all the way up
No,
to...
I'm saying that like when he 2nd jhana in terms of when he meets someone and he's communicating, like that he doesn't have the discernment process that we have in the way that we are reactive to everything.
Spontaneous. The Buddha just acts spontaneously. It's a spontaneous action. So
no intention, right? Because
no intention. It's just spontaneous. Spontaneous actions, just spontaneous perception of everything there is, and just acting accordingly to what's necessary. So nothing to hold the Buddha back. But I think it takes too much time. This is when you learn so much about Buddhism, study a lot about the mind, etc. Then you get a sense that Buddhahood is possible. Just saying it like that seems like a fairy tale. So of course I could try and answer that, but it would take too long and too many details about the nature of the mind, why Buddhahood is possible. Okay? So jhana means concentration. A state of concentration. So you mentioned the 2nd state of... I would translate it as concentration, to use an English word for it. Like formless... You're talking about form and formless jnana, right?
No, that's the Upasana bodies. That's not the jhanas.
Oh, so what are you talking about with the jnana?
The jhanas.
Jhana, oh, jhana, oh,
The Theravadian tradition, there's a common mistake that recognize the jhanas as because of concentration.
But then what do you mean with jhana if it's not a concentration?
For example, it's a state of mind where first jhana is where one sits and abides in the first jhana when the 5 hindrances are not arising.
What are the 5 hindrances?
5 hindrances are the craving, anger, deep doubts.
The afflictions.
Well, in English it's the 5 hindrances.
Okay.
It's not boredom. It's restlessness. It's restlessness, and also there's
something with
intoxicates, like tiredness and
Laxity. Dardali. I learned from Alon.
These are the
No, kidding.
fragrances. So when they
Yeah.
don't appear, naturally a person he abides in the first jhana, which means the lack
First
of
jhana.
those. It's a certain state of mind that is lack of those.
Okay, that gets, I mean, you see, this is the problem. Like, does it mean they're just temporary gone?
Yeah,
they're
they're all
totally gone?
temporary.
Ah, temporary gone. Okay, all right.
It's temporary.
So I don't really know how, there may not be a name given in this tradition, it's just slightly differently. So the vocabulary is used differently and it would take too long.
Yeah,
And sorry, I can't answer this question.
Just
Just
asked what it is.
no, it was good that you explained, because I thought if I understand I can kind of transfer, but I don't know. Okay, sorry, you raised your hand.
What I asked before,
No, he was first.
when you were lecturing,
Uh-huh.
you were talking about hell states.
Pardon?
You were talking about hell states.
Hell states.
Yeah, and when you said that, I kept thinking about what happens collectively. Like, for example, let's say somebody studies history.
Mm-hmm.
So he's being told about Hiroshima and all these other things.
Mm.
So I'm just wondering, how do you approach the knowledge that you were given in a culture? What's going on here? Like, you're exposed to this. This was a hell state for somebody else, but you're partaking in it somehow through the reading or whatever you're being exposed to.
Okay, I see. So you're saying, like, for instance, experiencing Hiroshima would be like a hellish state.
For them, I'm sure, but for me, even
Yes,
hearing
yes.
about it or seeing the pictures,
Right.
it's
Okay,
also-
for them it means like for the survivors or those who were killed?
Yes, those who survive.
Well, for the ones who were killed, it was just a brief moment. It
I
was
said for those who survive.
okay. So those who survived, all right, that is a hellish experience. I agree. But of course, each person has a different experience individually. For some, it was worse. For others, it was not as that. So it always depends. So I agree, it's a hellish experience. Now you're saying, how about us, who are also affected by it, by just hearing about it, or studying about it, learning about it? Well, yes, this experience of suffering that could be a result of that. I don't think it's a hellish state. It's just feeling sad about it, feeling depressed about it. That could definitely happen. And that is also a result of actions we've accumulated in the past. But of course, they're not as severe as for those who were there in that moment.
But you
yes.
talked about karma, so I was wondering, is what we know part of our karma?
No,
For example,
what we know can give rise to the experience of suffering.
But can also
So for instance, as a result of seeing, hearing about this, so it could give rise to a karma of being depressed about it. But of course, it's we can also control it. We can also start thinking about this. So sometimes people use this argument, well, why would you generate compassion? If I think of the people in Hiroshima, they're all suffering, they were suffering, it really depresses me. So in order to have compassion, I need to think about the suffering of others. That is depressing, so compassion is depressing.
yeah,
But that's misunderstanding compassion, because actually, if you think about their suffering, if you bring in wisdom, understanding that, so the negativity that they've accumulated, now that's gone. That type of suffering they can no longer experience. Plus, to give you the determination, I myself need to do something, the courage. There is a lot of suffering. And suffering is impermanent. Now they're not suffering, maybe some still, but they've gotten rid of that karma, and even more so, I need to work harder, I need to do something. So it can depress us, it can lead to the ripening of a negative karma, but we can also control that to some degree, in that I can choose to go, okay, now I'm not using this to make me feel depressed, but rather, this is reality, this is life. Worse, even worse could happen. At least this was limited because the hell realms are much longer, the experience is much longer. And now I didn't have to experience that, now I need to do something. It should actually, the best way would be to have a better full understanding of the impermanence, for instance, and of the fact that suffering can be removed, and use that not to feel unhappy, but to be more courageous, to have compassion. Compassion comes along with courage. Yeah? So it's in our hand. If you suffer in that moment, that is of course an experience of karma, but we can control what kind of karma in certain situation will ripen. Instead of allowing it to depress me, I go, no, I'm put an end to this. I'm going to think about this. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. But if for now it makes sense, good. Okay, but then Sippy had a question.
Yeah, but regarding that.
Regarding that. Okay, can you wait a sec? Regarding that.
It can also be a possibility to purify the karma.
Yes, that's what I said. The karma is purified for that person.
Even without, yeah, now I'm going to do something, but it's kind of, even if I, give a prayer or do something, that is just not that I'm going out and doing anything. This can also help in purifying.
Well, praying, if praying would help, then we'd all be okay. Because the Buddhas would pray for us all the time.
So
It can help.
Maybe prayer is not the right...
Okay, think about it. In the meantime, I answer the Sippy question. Okay, so Sippy asked, what about exaggerating, when we exaggerate the self, right? That's the view of, the extreme view of reification. Is there also a view of nihilism with regard to the self?
Do you have example?
Do you have an example?
Of the extreme of
Nihilism. Well, one example, I already mentioned it, in the continuum of the Charakas. There's no karma. There's no person. There's no self that experiences the results of my actions. So I can just go ahead and do whatever I want. But this extreme of nihilism is not as pervasive as reification. I think I mentioned that. Our view of reification, of making things hypostatizing, right, of like permanence, of an extreme view of existence, it's all pervasive. When we have it, it's like everything seems to exist more solidly. With regard to nihilism, we never fall into an extreme such we actually believe there's nothing there. That would be ridiculous. It's not like you meditate and then believe nothing is there. I mean, you still got to go to the toilet when you need to go. I don't think it actually makes sense to say nothing exists, I'm not there, I'm not there. That would be really bizarre. Irid, do you disagree?
No, I'm saying it is easy to fall into nihilism.
I would agree that you fall into extreme of nihilism, but I said it's not pervasive, like there's nothing.
I can say from my own experience,
Yeah.
She wanted an example.
Yeah.
When I first studied about emptiness, and I started to divide things into atoms, and I thought, everything is atoms, so everything is atoms, so everything is just one cloud of atoms moving around. This is nihilism.
No, you said there's atoms. A cloud of atoms. So you see, it's not consequent. It's not consequent. So it's a good example. It's great. So there's nothing but atoms. But there's atoms. So it's not totally, like I said, all pervasive would mean there's nothing. But you still had atoms. Sorry, you raised your hand before that.
Exactly what we're talking now.
Yes.
So the Travakas is really nihilism, but what do they say about Western materialism? They will say there is a conventional self, and they say that's all there is. So now if you take like the first few lines that we learned about...
Are you talking about the Charakas?
No, about Western materialism.
Okay, Western.
They say that there is only a conventional self, and that's all there is.
They say conventional self? They use that word?
They may not use that word, but this is what they're going to say. All you have is your feelings and your mind and your body, and you have nothing else permanent besides that.
Okay.
So then you can take the first two lines that we talked about, like if we had a self, would it be like the aggregates or different from? And think about consciousness. Just examine consciousness.
Okay.
So it would be true that if it's different from the aggregates, but then materialism would say, but it doesn't exist. If it would exist, consciousness, it could be different and permanent and all the things we say, but it doesn't exist. How can you prove that it exists? And then there's like the link between consciousness in the Buddhist way and karma and reincarnation, that they're all linked together, but there's nothing fundamental that I understand, maybe this is what you can explain, that actually says that it exists, that we can prove that it exists.
You mean consciousness?
Yeah, consciousness and then obviously if you assume reincarnation or assume karma or assume consciousness, they all link together. But
They're
if
all
you
linked
deny
together.
all three of them, like
Yes,
materialism does.
Okay, let's
It's
just
not
make
exactly
sure.
nihilism.
Okay, so Tsipi's question. First, let's deal with the question because, like, you're bringing in your own experience, which is helpful, modern materialists. But let's just make sure. So, I hope this question is answered in terms of right. So I don't think you can fall into the extreme of nihilism, like as in like really thinking there's totally nothing. And Irit had a great example, but at least she ended up with atoms. And then when she got up from the meditation, I mean, you still ate, you know, it wasn't like, oh, it's just atom wanting to eat atoms, I'm not going to eat, right? You still had your dinner and your lunch, etc. So it's like, for the time being, it's a temporary falling into the extreme of nihilism, so it doesn't really get you to starve to death. And secondly, there's always something there. That is what I would claim. It can be debated. But Shaha, and then I'll still address that. So Shaha is...
Maybe asked regarding this self, the way I understood it is that we have misconception regarding the self.
Yes.
Right? So there are the innate ones,
Yes.
and there are the
Intellectually
acquired ones.
Yes.
So I would ask, regarding the innate ones, can we say that the innate ones can be also nihilist ones, or that regarding the innate ones is always fabricated or elaborated ones, adding to appearances?
Well, like, can you have an innate nihilistic view? That's your question. I don't think you can have... So his question is we can have... he thought that her question was with regard to the self, more specifically with regard to the self.
The example you gave was about to see the eye.
Okay, so it was the eye. All right, it was the eye. Now, Shaha, he's differentiating between perceiving the eye wrongly in an exaggerated way. There are two types. There's the innate, natural way in which we exaggerate the existence of the self, and there's the intellectually acquired one. The innate one we all have naturally. The intellectually acquired one is the one we add on top of our innate sense that there is a separate I. We create this idea of a soul. We're not born like that. Little children, unless they're taught about a soul, they don't have that sense. They don't talk about a soul as such. Or ego, super ego, as like Freud talks about it. Okay. Now his point is he brings in the innate. Now what do you think? Is there an innate nihilism?
What is the innate?
Is there an innate nihilism? It's contradictory. Very good.
It can't be because we were born because of the...
It can't be because we innately exaggerate. Yeah. So either you innately, naturally exaggerate, or you naturally deny. Right? It's one of the two. So Irit is saying they're in contradiction, and Tsipi is arguing, no, we were born because of that innate reification. So we're born, therefore, with the continuum of that. So in answer to that, therefore, would it be intellectually acquired? Well, that's the only other option. It's an intellectually acquired. It's because of the reasoning you do, since you can't find a self. Now, instead of understanding it exists, therefore, conventionally, now you believe it doesn't exist at all. You fall into the other extreme. But that cannot be innate.
I don't understand it. Because I think that I understand what you said. But I thought that, okay, I cannot study a text and become nihilist. I understand that. But let's say that I meditate on it.
Yes.
And
through analytical meditation.
Analytical and even after having inferential cognition, can I fall to nihilism? Not now that I have innate and I don't control it and I have a sense of self. So of course I'm not nihilist.
You've realized emptiness and then fall into No. I'm saying like.
Can I fall to nihilism then? Can I have a danger of?
Is there a danger of
changing the innate sense of self
into an innate sense of nihilism?
Other extreme, yes.
How could you? You always have the innate one until you don't, and you.
So there's no dangers of being nihilist.
So, I mean, just logically, could you actually have her question is, through Buddhist practice, could you have an innate nihilism?
Let's maybe I will just to figure out a bit. You just to remind myself, okay? First, the intellectually acquired, we live in the path of seeing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are quite developed then.
Mm-hmm.
We will not fall out of compassion and out of this.
Okay, very good. Nissim is taking it very logically, very step by step. Okay, once you're on the path of seeing, you can no longer have the intellectually acquired grasping at reification. Like no longer any intellectually required exaggeration of the self. So the extreme of reification, just think nihilism, reification. Reification means perceiving things to exist inherently. Why not? Because you realize emptiness directly. At that moment, you can't realize. Once you realize emptiness directly, even if you realize it conceptually, how could you, as long as you don't lose that realization, as long as you have that, how could you fall into the extreme of nihilism? So it couldn't happen on the path of seeing. It couldn't happen on the path of preparation. So when would it happen?
Okay, so that's the question. We're talking about dangerous of falling into the extreme of nihilism.
Okay.
We all agree that we have innate
reification.
A sense of
okay, innate, yeah.
So where's the dangers of falling into nihilism?
Well, because innate nihilism is impossible. Can anyone have innate nihilism? We've established no. Are you still doubting that?
So there's no nihilism. Because
there is the intellectually acquired one.
You can overcome the
but I can say that I am nihilist, but I have the self-sense of I. It's innate within me.
Can you have love towards a person?
You can be brainwashed.
Can you have hatred towards that person? How can you have love towards that person and have hatred towards that person? Can you love your lover? Can you hate your lover? Of course you can't do both. Not at the same time. So, of course you have innate reification, but every now and then, right, you have like, for instance, we're with another person. Usually the people we're close to. So the people like our spouses, our partners, right? And moments we love them deeply, we want them to be happy, and at other moments we resent them. We can do that, just not at the same time. So usually there's an innate sense of the I existing inherently. Is it always present? No. There are times when it's not present. So when you intellectually think about I and you meditate, the I can't be found. So sometimes you have an innate sense of an I that you're not aware of, and at other times you believe that the I doesn't exist. Right? There are many examples like that, where we have an innate sense of this, that, and the other, but intellectually it's the opposite. Okay? We can intellectually think, oh no, things change all the time. But then every now and then we have a sense, same guy that bothered me yesterday. Oh, that's the same guy. Oh, that's the same mountain I saw last year. Well, welcome to a sense of permanence. It's not the same mountain. Right? It's a feeling, it's a very subtle kind of mind. It's not as coarse as the intellectual one. It doesn't use language oftentimes. That's our problem. This is why some of these emotions, our misperceptions, they're so innate, they don't need language. You don't need language, because we were born with those. So you can do it without using the coarse vocabulary. We're much more aware of the intellectual ones that use words, where you think, are things permanent or not? No, of course they're impermanent, right? Or, am I going to die or not? Of course I will die. And then it feels inside, yeah, but not tomorrow. Oh, I could die tomorrow. I could die anytime. Yeah, but I'm too busy. I'm not going to die tomorrow. So there are these different awarenesses. There's this innate one that tells you, no, I won't die tomorrow. It's very hard to capture that, because it's not as coarse. And there's the intellectual one, very coarse. It's like where you use words, where you use words much more. So you see, we're up against something very powerful. So nihilism could be like, I can't find anything. So if there's no I, then my actions don't have consequences. So I can just do whatever I want. And at the same time, every now and then, oh, you're accusing me?